Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for coming on a busy Friday afternoon. We're really very honored to have with us Commissioner Malmstrom today, and I couldn't thank you enough for making the effort to be with us. I'm Janow, Dean of SIPA, and it's really a very special moment to be discussing this afternoon with European Commissioner Cecilia Malmström international trade, the transatlantic negotiations, and broader international economic policy and trade matters. I'd like to begin by also acknowledging that this gathering represents a collaboration between SIPA and Columbia Law School, both of which institutions and Columbia broadly have a profound commitment to the study of international economic law, economics and policy, and delighted to be collaborating with Professor Petros Mavroidis in today's discussion. As you all know, in June, the U.S. Congress renewed President Obama's what we call fast-track authority to negotiate trade agreements, including agreements such as the transatlantic TTIP framework that's under very active negotiation, and the Trans-Pacific negotiations, TPP, which are at the front of the queue in U.S. Regional negotiations. We also have, of course, the ongoing Doha negotiations somewhere in the atmosphere, and we have, of course, services negotiations under the multilateral framework that appear to be quite active, and an important ministerial in Nairobi coming up around trade facilitation issues in the WTO framework that will hopefully advance to the next stage after a period of rather a slow start after a Bali ministerial some time ago. So we have a lot to talk about this afternoon, potentially. And I'm really very pleased that we have with us Cecilia Malmström, who is the European Commissioner for Trade, and in that position, she is the absolute point person in Europe around all of these issues. And she's had an extraordinary career as a minister and public official in Europe. As noted, she became Trade Commissioner in 2014, but prior to that, she was the European Commissioner for Home Affairs, where I believe you dealt with issues such as security and privacy and migration and other issues, some of which are really increasingly trade-related, and others of which are just of profound importance to the future of Europe. So we're very grateful to have her here with that experience. And from 2006 to 2010, she was the Minister for EU Affairs in her home country of Sweden, if I'm not mistaken, and prior to that, Vice President of the Swedish Liberal Party. She served for a number of years, 2006 back to 1999, as a member of the European Parliament, and she's absolutely no stranger to the Academy, having been a senior lecturer in the Department of Political Science at a university, Gothenburg, where she also obtained her PhD in political science. I wonder if you're the only PhD political scientist in the European Parliament. I wonder in that history. No, not so. Okay. So please join me in welcoming Commissioner Malmström for this extraordinary opportunity we have to discuss the Atlantic trade framework and where we might be headed. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Madam Dean. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a true pleasure and an honor to be here today, of course, being at the Columbia Law School and the School of International and Public Affairs, both top-class departments at a global level. So I feel honored to be here, and I'm looking forward to our discussion this afternoon. I will give you a sense of some issues we are dealing with at the EU level when it comes to trade, and Madam Dean alluded to some of them. The title of this event is TTIP and Beyond, European Union Trade Policy in the 21st Century. That gives a pretty accurate illustration of my work at the moment. The public debate in the European Union today, trade policy is very much synonymous to TTIP, the agreement that we are trying to achieve with the United States. That is understandable. TTIP is a very big negotiation between the two biggest economies of the world. We have very big ambitions with this agreement, and of course this is something that is very much debated. But TTIP is only one part of our wider efforts when it comes to trade. And we're using a full range of policy tools to boost our economy in the European Union and to help us to adapt to a changing world. We are working on more than 20 trade agreements with more than 60 countries across the Americas, Asia, and Africa. So I'd also like to give you a flavor of the beyond part of our trade agenda as well. And I'd like to do that by looking at the trade policy's two biggest challenges: effectiveness and responsibility. And by effectiveness, I mean that trade policy needs to work, needs to deliver results. And to do that, we must adapt to economic realities. Trade is no longer about finished products. Through global value chains, trade and investment have become very much part of the production itself. And some experts today argue that the growth of these chains have slowed in recent years. That may be cyclical or it might be permanent. It's a bit too early to say. But either way, the linkages that have been forged in recent years require us to adapt. If we want to be competitive, we have to facilitate this value chain trade. Trade policy also needs to take into account the changes in the nature of cross-border flows. In the past, goods were far and away the most significant component, and they're still important. But we also need to look at services, transport, finance, technical support. We need to address investment. We need to address the rise of the digital economy, which means data flows. We also need to deal with mobility, the fact that people often need to cross borders in order to for trade to happen, to maintain the goods that we are exporting, or to be part of that as well. And trade policy also needs to adapt in order to broaden the base of companies that take advantage of trade agreements. 30% of European exports are by small and medium-sized companies. But it's true still that most companies, the small and medium-sized companies, do not export. Some will never even consider it because they have a local market, but some really do want to do it. But it's too expensive, it's too cumbersome, it's too difficult, and we need to improve that. We need to facilitate for them. So what are we doing? Well, the best way to facilitate value chain trade is multilateral trade liberalization through the World Trade Organization. It caters for the fact that inputs may cross multiple borders multiple times. So the EU is working with many partners around the world to deliver a result at the Nairobi Ministerial in December this year. This was supposed to be the time when the world finally delivers on the Doha Development Round agenda. We'll see, there's still a lot of work to do. We are also making progress on a range of targeted negotiations with groups of WTO members with the aim to bring it within WTO when we have reached the critical mass. Information technology equipment services, TISA. We also have an agreement in trade, or we are negotiating an agreement with trade in green goods. And we need to start thinking about what happens after Nairobi, after Doha. How can we use WTO to continue setting global rules and global cooperation? Because we need to keep multilateralism in mind when we negotiate all our bilateral and regional free trade agreements. And here TTIP is a particularly good example. It covers around 40% of the global economy already, and it is ambitious. Our aim is an advanced set of rules on issues like state-owned companies, localization requirements, raw materials, and energy. We are, of course, trying to get rid of classical tariffs, increase market access from both sides, but also to break new ground when it comes to regulatory cooperation. in general, and also for 9 specific areas that we have identified, such as pharmaceuticals, cars, cosmetics, textiles, mechanics, etc. The result of these efforts could serve as a model for global solutions. So through the bilateral way, we are preparing the ground for future multilateral work. And moreover, an ambitious TTIP outcome on issues like services, digital trade, mobility could help to set precedents for tackling these issues in a way that fits with today's economic realities. TTIP will be the first agreement where the EU negotiators have decided to have dedicated provisions on SMEs' benefits as much as possible. It should be our most ambitious agreement, but in all EU free trade agreements we seek to be ambitious, of course, to make sure that they are adapted to the economic realities and that they work. A couple of years ago we finalized an agreement with Korea, and it is now fully functional since 4 years, and our exports from the European side have risen with more than 50% since its entry into force. We have recently concluded with Canada, and this summer also with Vietnam, and they are groundbreaking in different ways, and we mean to go on in this level of ambition. But we need to think collectively how bilateral agreements relate to each other. One example is what we've done in Latin America. We had an agreement in place with Colombia and Peru for several years. Last year we reached an agreement with Ecuador to join in. And that's something we might want to look at when it comes to TTIP as well. Other countries, once it is agreed, could join in, and that could be a joint platform. The second theme I wanted to talk about is responsibility. Trade is, of course, very much about economic policy, but it's not an island. The choices we make about trade must reflect our values. It is actually enshrined in the treaties of the European Union that all foreign policy, all contacts with third countries must reflect the values that we are based upon. So over the last 2 years in the European Union, the debate on trade has been very intense, and I've seen that here as well. There is an increased debate on trade issues. Much of the concern is a call to greater responsibility and also a greater willingness to be involved. Consumers today want to know how are the products I use or I wear produced? Under what conditions? What are the environmental footprint? Are there child labor involved? Are the conditions decent? They want to know, they want to be involved. And that is very important. And that puts pressure on us as policymakers. We have to listen to that debate, we have to understand it, we have to relate to it, and we have to respond to it. And here again, TTIP is at the forefront. Not least because it is, at least for us, the most controversial. I know that here the main focus so far hasn't been mainly on the Trans-Pacific Partnership. But maybe TTIP will be as controversial in some time. So this is an opportunity to really look at some of our approaches and to update them. One issue is about the way we negotiate. When trade deals cover issues like regulations on safety, health, environment, people need to trust that we're not lowering any standards. They need to feel sure that even if we talk about harmonizing and recognizing each other's standards, they will not be lowering. And if we want their trust, we need to be open. And that is why we have decided from the EU side to be extremely open when it comes to TTIP. All our negotiating positions, once we have sent them to the US, are online. All our background material, different reports relating to it, our legal proposals are online. And we are now examining why, if we can do so also with other agreements. Of course, we cannot move the TV cameras into the negotiation room. There has to be a certain element of discretion if you want to make a deal. But a lot can actually be public. And I would like to say that from our point of view, the TTIP negotiations are the most transparent trade negotiations ever. So this is about the process. And also engaging with people, explaining, listening to the concerns, having different stock-taking events where civil society and different interested partners can come, ask questions, and we give them real concrete information about how the negotiation round is developing and what is the latest. But it's also very much about substance. One issue that is extremely controversial related to this is the issue of investment protection. They have been called ISDS, this acronym that is one of the most well-known acronyms actually in Europe. When I looked it up on Google, the first reference you get is International Shepherd Dog Society. But this is not about this. This is about investment protection, state investor to state dispute mechanisms. And there is a considerable concern in Europe, but also in many other countries. I get indications from ministers from all over the world that this is being discussed also in their countries, about the possibilities for investors to take cases against governments. So we have listened very carefully to that debate in the civil society, in the national parliaments, about European representatives as well. And we just last week published a proposal for a new system. It's now being checked with member states and the European Parliament, and we hope that we very soon can send this to our American counterparts as our contribution to these negotiations. Because, of course, investments need to be protected. They need to be protected in an environment where they're not subject to discrimination or expropriation or nationalization. But this needs to be done in a way that the public can feel comfortable with this. So we, in our proposal, have made clear that governments can make policy choices. They can legislate to protect their citizens or the environment, and that can never be put into question by an investor. We have also tried to reform the system to a more arbitration system with a more transparent way and a court-like system where pre-designed judges who will look at this. So we hope that this will lead to a system that citizens can trust, but is still functional for the investors as well. Europe is the biggest user of this system, and we have almost half of the global ones in the world, so it is natural that we try to take a leadership in order to reform these debates. The Germans invented it in the 50s. So we hope that this will serve as a basis for our investment deals in TTIP, of course, where we will discuss with the Americans. We don't expect them to accept every comma. Of course, it will be part of our negotiations, but also how we see it in all other ongoing and future negotiations. And the aim is to try to create a multilateral court in the future, but that will take a little bit of time. So as I said, consumers today are concerned about the social and environmental footprints of the products they buy from abroad. And that is very good news. Trade, like all international policy, should help to put our values and principles into practice. That goes for development of less developed countries, for human rights, labor rights, protecting the environment. And trade policymakers around the world have increasingly come to this view in recent decades. And we from the European Union play our part as well. We offer advanced preference systems for developing countries and free access for the products of the least developed countries. We have concluded a series of what we call economic partnership agreements. These are regional agreements in Africa, Caribbean, and the Pacific, and they contain asymmetrical access to our markets for them. And we also attach a large amount of development aid to those agreements in order to make sure that they don't only enter theoretically the international trade market, but that we give them the tools to develop the necessary infrastructure to do that, and also increasingly cooperate on a regional basis with each other to facilitate trade. We are the most significant provider from the European Union of the aid for trade that helps countries all over the world to take advantages of trade and its opportunities. And the sustainable development rules of all our agreements encourage countries to respect core conventions of the ILO, the International Labour Organization, and other key international conventions. We can do more in this. We should have ambitious provisions on labour and environment in TTIP, as we do in all other agreements. We should give more support to fair and ethical trade schemes. And we should do more to promote responsible supply chain management by companies. Many companies are involved in this already. They do a very, very good job, but we should encourage this much more and work with those who do. And we will be talking about these issues in a document that we will publish very soon. It's a new trade strategy where we're outlining not only our geographical priorities, but also the approach that we want to have for trade policies in the future. So, Madam Dean, ladies and gentlemen, I hope this gives a quick overview about the issues that we are facing in the European Union, but also for many other countries. Resolving them will require hard work and political will from us and our partners, of course. And it will need creative thinking, not only within governments, but also from a variety of stakeholders, including the academic community. And I know that a lot of thinking is being done here in this house, so I hope that you will provide with the good input to these discussions today or maybe later. And with this, I think I end with this overview, and I'm looking very much forward to our discussion. Thank you very much.
Very much. Wonderful. Well, that's a fantastic setting of the stage. If you don't mind, what I'd like to do is, as we have our great expert and colleague, Professor Petros Mavroidis with us, invite Professor Mavroidis to ask the first question, if I may ask another, and then open it up for some discussion. That would be great.
Okay. That's something very nice and very informative. I mean, my question is very banal in a way, but since we're at Columbia and we're in the house of Jagdish Bhagwati, I have to ask this question. What is the opportunity cost of TTIP? I mean, I see TTIP, TPP, RCEP, if I put next to it TISA maybe. I see an appetite for trade deals, but none of them takes place in the WTO or in Geneva. At the same time, Doha Round is stalling. And I wonder, I mean, all these initiatives, was Jagdish's intuition 20 years ago that these are more like stumbling blocks and not building blocks correct? Or can we make them still, turn them into building blocks and subsidize multilateralism in the future?
Well, I wish that was the case. Of course, ideally, you're absolutely right. These negotiations would take place within the WTO context. But it is unfortunately a fact that the last decade WTO has not really functioned. I mean, the arbitration mechanism functions very well, and for that we should be eternally grateful. But WTO has, we've been dwelling over the Doha round for 14 years now, and that has taken a lot of energy and unfortunately affected the credibility of the WTO system. I am a great defender of the multilateralism in general, and I really want WTO to sort of wake up and take that responsibility. But as an effect, the United States, the European Union, but also countries like Japan, China, Australia, you name them, have engaged in this spaghetti ball of different bilateral agreements. That is unfortunate in a way, but that's the case. And of course, no partner, no country can afford to stay outside that out of principle. What we need to make sure is that what we agree upon is WTO compatible, and that the big agreements are as open as possible. I know that there are discussions in Asia whether other countries could join the Trans-Pacific Partnership afterwards when the 12 have signed. We have proposed from the European Union side that once TTIP is done, maybe other countries could join up as well, so that they are open platforms and that they are fully in coherence with WTO rules as they exist today. But we still need to put some life into WTO, not only the Doha round, but there's so many issues we need to discuss in WTO level on digital trade or rules of origin or what have you. And I really hope that whatever happens in Nairobi, that there is a willingness to sort of start working within the multilateral agenda as well, because more and more countries are joining. That's a good thing. But we also need to move to something else than a talking shop. Well, there is an important momentum by the end of this year. I just hope that countries are ready to take it.
Thank you very much. Perhaps I could ask a question with two dimensions, specifically about TTIP, and that is both the old and the new, in the sense, you know, the idea of deeper economic integration between the United States and Europe and trying to find bilateral mechanisms is not new. And in the past, it has been these regulatory areas that offered the great promise, but proved to be great obstacles for actually integration on supply chain type issues and so on. So now I think you've got many working groups underway. Mutual recognition wasn't a way forward in the past. You know, what's going to get us over these traditional difficulties in working through these problems? If you could give us some insight on that, it would be great. And further, you've mentioned several times now digital trade. And I know that Europe has also recently issued a single digital policy. And often in countries, when a domestic consensus is arrived at around issues, it's easier to develop an international framework. And so I'm wondering now, as you think about what would be most important in digital trade, what are some of the things you think we should be trying to achieve?
Mm-hmm. Well, on your first question on regulatory cooperation, indeed, when you look at it just from outside, without entering into the details, that this should be easy. We should be able to agree that we don't have to put our clothes into flames twice, because we do it exactly the same way in Europe and in the US, but still you have to do it twice if you want to sell it. That costs a lot of money for small companies. That you don't have to do your car crash test, that you don't have to check your seatbelt little clicking mechanism, that you can inspect the factories only once, because you do it exactly the same way. But then it turns out that it's quite complicated, because you have this myriad of agencies here in the US, and we have our rules as well. So we are working ourselves through these issues, together with a lot of input from experts, from regulators, from the industry, of course, and independent expert reports. It's not easy, but I think we will get there. We'll not achieve everything we want, but at least quite a few issues that can solve result, and also set in motion a process where our regulators can meet on a regular basis, on an advisory basis as well, to discuss future standards. What will be the new standards in future telephones or biotechnology or electric cars, nanotechnology, or what have you. There will be a need to set standards to make sure that products are safe for consumers and environment. And we have the best regulators in the world, in the EU and Europe. So if we put them together, and they can share advice, they can share experience, they can share data, and then give advice to the legislators in the Congress or in the European Parliament to see this is how you could solve it. Of course, they have to do the legislation. That could then set standards for the rest of the world as well in the future. And I think that could be a good thing, because we have other economic powers who are not so much concerned about consumer safety or environmental safety. And if we don't set the standards, someone else will. So I hope we can achieve concrete results on some of the regulatory cooperation, but also set in motion a process for the future, and that would be a really good thing, hopefully. And of course, then other countries would have to do that. On the digital trade, this is an important market for the future. I think we here agree that this is important. The stumbling block here is, of course, data protection. Mm-hmm. Because if you do digital trade, you have to transfer a lot of data. And sometimes that is personal data. And how is that used? And by whom? And how is it protected? And the last years or 2 years debate on data protection, on surveillance, on NSA, on Snowden still echoes very strongly in Europe and in many countries. And that plays into the debate. People don't trust the companies to have what happens to my personal data here. So we need to set rules to make sure that we have strong data protection. That is the most important issue. We have just achieved an umbrella agreement on data protection with the US. I think they're just finessing the final details. That's a very important step. And we are also negotiating, that's the work of my colleague, the Commissioner for Justice, the Safe Harbor Agreement, where there's still a few remaining issues when it comes to data protection, how data should be located and protected. So these are the main difficulties. But otherwise, I think that digital services in so many issues are the futures. Of course, we need to cooperate there. My colleague, Commissioner Oettinger, who is responsible for digital issues, is right now in Silicon Valley, I think, discussing these issues with some of your big companies there. And the way the digital internal market that we are trying to construct, of course, has an important trade element. And I'm working closely with my colleagues to ensure that what we do in Europe is facilitating also the external dimension.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Thank you. That's a very clear statement, very, very helpful. And we've seen this before in terms of as trade encompasses new subject matters, you know that we have to find cooperation with those regulatory agencies as well. I'm filibustering while you think of your questions, so let me open it up. And if you could identify yourself, and please do ask a question. Yeah. Sir.
My name is Rafael Timmermans. I work for a European company that is Telefonica. And when we speak about digital trade, it is like if that's a world apart. But the reality is that every single company that works in one country needs to have information all over the place. And companies that do now face uncertainty. Actually, right now, I don't know if you know about this case of Microsoft that is being asked by the American Justice of Data in Ireland. So the standard, the legal standard, is not set up neither in Europe nor here. And everyone is now very pessimistic about the evolution of the TTIP, and in particular of the digital part of the TTIP. And the last decision by the general lawyer of the Verification Adoption about the safe harbor agreement makes it much more difficult to advance. How optimistic are you about negotiations? What term do you think we need to have something? That's an agreement, right? But something.
As Karl Popper said, the British-Austrian philosopher, optimism is a duty. So I think as politicians and academics, that's something we need to stick to. It is true that it's becoming difficult, and the impact that the Snowden NSA had on European perception, the debate in many countries, and that is still having, is complicating these matters enormously, because people don't trust these companies who deal with data. And that of course put pressure on the national politicians, and then in turn to those of us who are negotiating on a European basis. And that complicates matters. The case you just referred to, that was a preliminary result by the Advocate General, so let's wait for the final. But that illustrates even more the urgency to have an updated, functional agreement on safe harbor. And my Czech colleague, Mrs. Janow, is working very hard on that, together with the Attorney General of the United States and the team. So they're working hard to get an agreement. This is delaying it. This is putting a cloth over the whole subject. There's no use denying that, but I'm confident we will achieve results on it. Not everything we wanted, and it will probably be gradual, because you need to build that trust as well. Lots of reforms are being done here in the US as well when it comes to limiting the surveillance of people and protecting data. And then one of the stumbling blocks has been whether there was any possibility for a European citizen to seek redress in US. That is in principle now agreed that can be the case. So we are working ourselves there while building trust and setting the safeguards. So I'm positive we will have an agreement on this. It will not be as far-reaching as you and others want, but maybe we can, TTIP will be a living agreement. We can move on also after we have formally signed it.
Okay, I think while that is being secured, I think I see Professor Carl Savant.
Thank you. Carl Savant, Columbia Center on Sustainable Investment. I want to pick up on one of your favorite topics, I'm sure, which is investor-state dispute settlement. I think it's very laudable that the Commission is seeking to institutionalize the regime, and I just hope that your member states, in particular the US, will be brought on board. And I guess you're coming from Washington, so maybe you can give us a hint. Institutionalizing the regime would do a lot in terms of legitimizing it. But there's another aspect, and that's the question I would like to ask, and that is access to the regime, either ad hoc, as it is now, or even if there is a World Investment Court, access for poor countries. My question, would it make sense for the Commission or individual member states perhaps to take the initiative to establish a international advisory center on international investment law, similar to what you have for the WTO? And it has worked very well for the WTO, and it has helped to increase the legitimacy of the regime, especially after the Seattle Ministerial. So my guess is, if the legitimacy of the regime is one of the objectives, maybe something could be done in that direction. Question to you, do you think that might be something one could consider? Thank you.
Thank you. That's a very interesting point you raised there, and if you have further thoughts on that, we'll be happy to please send it to me, because we've just outlined how we first want to go about on a bilateral level. So I did talk Ambassador Froman through our proposal. Of course, he has read it. He was online the moment we presented it. But we didn't enter into negotiations there, because I want to make sure that the final checking with member states and Parliament, which is ongoing now or beginning of next week, so we can say this is the European proposal. I know this debate has been going on in the context of the Trade Promotion Authority as well, that when we the issue of transparency, of the right to regulate, the appellate mechanism, for instance, are also have been in the US debate. But we haven't started negotiating this yet with the Americans. It will be by the end of the year, I think. So we don't know the initial reaction. Then the next step is, of course, to gather support to see how we can build a multilateral court. There are already existing systems. There are lots of thoughts being done. We are starting to talk to other partners around the world, both developed countries and least developed countries. There is an interest to take part of that, but we haven't yet figured out exactly how that system would look like. So we have people working on it, we're taking advice and so on, and this, what you bring up, is a very important element. One could envisage doing something like that. And again, Professor, if you have more thoughts about that, please give them to that, and they will feed into our reflection on this.
Could you just say another word why you think this is so controversial? I mean, nobody knew what ISDS was, 3 years ago.
Shepherd dogs. There are many and few answers to that. It has become the symbol, I think, of big corporate greediness. Fair or unfair, it has become the symbol of this. Many people here, but particularly in Europe, suffered immensely from the economic crisis. The whole Lehman Brothers and then the economic crisis. Millions of people unemployed, millions of people had to leave their houses, millions of people on the street. And in that context, there was a strong suspicion towards big business corporates who sort of created the crisis in many people's perception. So that, I think, has created a sort of natural suspicion towards this. And also there has been a few cases that very successfully have figured in social media and media that illustrates how this could be abused. There is a case ongoing, has nothing to do with Europe. It's Philip Morris have raised a case against Australia. They wanted to protect their citizens from the dangers of smoking, so they decided to do plain packaging. And then Philip Morris, via a post-order company in, was it Singapore or Hong Kong, sued the Australian government in a kind of agreement like this. In Europe, that would be a no-go with current rules. They would not win. And it's ongoing, so we don't know how it will end. Maybe you have experts here who have more information. So I think that sort of set the tone. This is what companies can do to us. Then social media and the organized opposition around not only TTIP, but also not only ISDS, but TTIP in general, or trade in general, have sort of used that as a very powerful uniting symbol. And I was amazed that wherever I travel in the European Union, there are thousands of people who seem to spend their days thinking about the dangers of ISDS clauses. I mean, it was invented in Germany in 1959. All European countries have hundreds of these bilaterally. And it is also very clear in the mandate that I have received unanimously from 28 countries on how to negotiate TTIP that it should be in. So I don't really know. There has been a few other cases as well. But this is really the symbol of what people dislike. And that's why we were... it was clear from this commission, my colleagues and myself, that from the beginning that we needed to take the opportunity to reform the system and try to regain trust. Now, some people have really appreciated the reforms and the direction. Then, of course, there are people who don't like the notion of free, they don't like the notion of trade, they don't like the notion of US. So that together doesn't matter what you do in ISDS, they will find something else. Those you cannot make happy, even if you say free ice cream for everybody. But at least many reasonable people take part in the debate, have been extremely constructive in trying to feed in to it and see how we can approach this in a more modern way.
Thank you. Sir?
My name is Job Wetterings. I'm a student in the business school, and I'm from the Netherlands, just for context. Earlier this week, your colleague Bienkowska, the EU Commissioner for Internal Trade in the EU, said that the internal market in Europe is more fragmented than it has ever been, and that there are huge barriers. So my question is, should Europe fix that internal problems with the internal market first, before integrating with the US? And given all current challenges, the Greek debt crisis, refugees, Ukraine, international, or our own internal market that's not working, do you think this is the right time to pursue integration with the US? From a point of view of the negotiation position, dropping popular support in Europe and your own resources at the European Commission?
That's a pertinent question. Ideally, in the best of all worlds, we would first deal with that crisis, and then we will fix the internal problems in the European Union, and then we will do this, and then we will start negotiating. But it doesn't work like that. Everything happens at the same time, and they are interrelated. Of course, we are now facing in being a Dutch citizen, you follow the European debate very closely, I imagine. The refugee crisis is very important. We're trying to address this. We have the Greek problem. Nobody is denying it. We're trying to address this as well. We are slowly getting out of the economic crisis in the European Union. There are many figures pointing at the right direction, but still a lot of work to do. Maybe my dear colleague Elisabetta exaggerated slightly, because of course the internal market has been built up for many decades. But it's true, we have lots of problems. It is fragmented. There are still issues we have and laws we have agreed upon decades ago that we haven't implemented, and there are still barriers for member countries' companies to fully take advantage of this. So we need to fix it. But I don't think we can wait until all that is arranged to liaise with the outer world, because it links in. One important way or one important element in economic growth is, of course, trade. So 90% of global growth the coming decades will be outside Europe. So we need to connect to that growth. And that's why we need those trade agreements in order to facilitate for our companies to do business. We have already 30 million jobs in Europe depending on exports only, and then several millions on imports. So we need to connect to that growth, and that can feed into the economic recovery, which will be good for Europe, for Greece, and for other issues as well. So no, I don't think we should wait. Thanks for taking the resources of DG Trade into consideration. They are very stretched. My people are working day and night, and we are still giving them new tasks every day. But we think this is actually a part of getting out of the crisis. And that the P in TTIP, partnership, is also important, because that goes beyond trade. That goes in the direction of promoting certain joint values that we have outside EU and the US, where we can work together on sustainable development, on responsible value chains, on eradication of child labor, protecting endangered species, and so on. And we want to do that together as well in TTIP. So that partnership is important. And if we cannot agree, EU and the US, who are different but still so alike, with our systems and our history, that who can agree? So we must be able to show the world also that we can do this. There are many actors around the who would be very happy if TTIP failed.
May I ask a follow-up on that? Do you see the TTIP as pushing in the direction in support of European internal objectives along these lines? I mean, if fragmentation is a problem, and you know, in various ways, you know, TTIP is an integration instrument that could support domestic objectives as well as bilateral. Do you see it that way?
Yes. Mm-hmm. We do that very much. This is as part of the reform that we need to do anyway, and some of the steps we need to take on the internal market. This will, we are trying in so many different ways to eliminate obstacles, to support our small and medium-sized companies. This is an additional way to give them possibilities and opportunities.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So.
Daniel Orman, Columbia Law School, and I'm an Australian. You've touched on the Trade in Services Agreement, and one of the other questioners asked about movement of people inside Europe. I wonder if you might talk about labour mobility issues and the importance of freeing up the movement of people as we free up the movement of capital and goods.
Yes, this is one of my pet subjects, actually, and I'm so sad that that is not moving so much. We are, of course, discussing the issue of mobility with our American partners. Whether it's in TTIP or not remains to be seen, because the TPA was very clear that these issues should not be covered by the Trade Promotion Authority because they link to migration and other issues. But of course, we need to facilitate for people to move as well. We're to 2015. So I attach great importance to this. This is an issue we should also bring to the WTO, and that we should absolutely have in mind when we do free trade agreements. But it's extremely sensitive, because the moment you start discussing these issues, the reflex is, this is migration. And migration is, nobody wants to touch it. It's not. It's about allowing the people to come with the services to move easier. We are discussing in TTIP the recognition of some qualifications that will make it easier for people with a certain education. We talk about architects, for instance, to move easier. But and I know that Australia and the US have some provisions of facilitating visa when it comes to certain services. So we are looking at that very closely and see if we can be inspired. Because in a modern trade agreement, you have to look at these issues as well. But they have become so politically sensitive, unfortunately.
Thank you. Sir.
Thank you very much for your remarks. You mentioned, Frank Flemish, I'm an international lawyer based here in New York. You mentioned in your remarks the importance of state-owned corporations or state-owned ownership as a very important principle. I think it was the first point that you raised in the context of TTIP. I'm just curious, it's a much bigger issue when it comes to the TTIP because of the role of state corporations in Southeast Asia and Asia in general. How do you see that? What's the role of state ownership in Europe and the impact on the trade agreement?
Well, if I raise that as a first point, and I'm sure you're right, that was not in any, I wasn't grading them, because of course this is an issue that is much more important in relation with other countries. We have an ongoing investment agreement negotiations with China, and there, of course, it is the heart of our talks. But we were seeking at establishing some rules on this, where we could agree, the EU and the US, that would then set the tone also globally. So in that context, we are discussing it.
Mm-hmm. Professor Krishna.
Praveen Krishna. Praveen Krishna, economics professor. The question I had was about EU negotiated FTAs in relation to kind of US negotiated FTAs. And I wondered if you could say if there were any systematic differences in what was being negotiated in the two contexts. And the reason I ask this is, if we think about this question that Professor Mavroidis raised earlier, about stumbling blocks versus building blocks and so forth, is there anything that's being negotiated now, and the differences between the two EU versus US FTAs that could become an obstacle for future expansion, or are these mostly similar types of agreements that could relatively easily be merged together in the future?
That's a very good question that I can't really answer, because the Trans-Pacific Partnership that is ongoing now with 12 countries, and I'm sure if you deal with this, you have a lot of information, but it's not very transparent on a global level. So we don't know exactly what is being negotiated there, and what effects and what kind of pressure or concessions or offers are in there. We hear a lot through the grapevines, of course, because we also have agreements and contacts with the countries there, but we don't really know, so it's very hard to compare, I would say. It's a very interesting subject, but I can't really answer. I mean, we can look at the existing agreements and our existing agreements, and I would say they are constructed more or less the same way. We put a lot of emphasis, but I see that the US are increasingly so as well, on sustainable development, reference to ILO conventions and so on, because we're bound to do so by our internal laws, but I have to look more systematically to that. But I would imagine that both of us are trying hard to follow, WTO rules, and the basis is openness, so that others could link in once they are finalized.
You know, I have the impression that one of the issues that is proving challenging in the US-European negotiations is around energy, where, if I'm not mistaken, Europe has taken the position that there must be an energy chapter, and the US is resisting. Could you share a little light on that issue from your perspective?
Indeed, we want energy to be part of negotiations. We have not opened that chapter yet. But we want that to be very much part of it, and you're absolutely right. The US have expressed more skepticism to have it included in TTIP. Not to discuss it, of course. We discuss everything, and then in the end, maybe there will be some things that will be done in parallel to TTIP. For us, this is more than just having access to be able to import gas and oil from the US. There are old restrictions related to this. It's not only an economic issue, it's very much a geopolitical issue. Many of our countries in the European Union are basically totally dependent on Russian gas. And for them, TTIP would be a crucial moment to diversify that dependence a little bit. And that's why they really insist that this chapter should be in, at least creating the possibilities of having other choices. So this goes far beyond the economics in TTIP. We want to have this in. We will hopefully start discussing the issues. I know that as a tradition, countries who have a free trade agreement with the US can import shale gas, unless it is not in the public interest. I think that's the formula or something. So we would, of course, seek to have that legally confirmed. And I also know that in the Congress right now, there is a debate on lifting the export restrictions on oil. So we follow that very closely, of course. But whatever happens there, it's very important for many of our member states. These two items, but also generally, of course, there are lots of things we can discuss when it comes to energy and facilitating trade in green technology, where both Europe and US are strong, and cooperating in a responsible use of resources and raw materials and so on.
May I have this point? I mean, this will be a fascinating question also from a pure legal perspective, because the US, they have MFN export, whatever restrictions, or they can have more export taxes. Now you request something which would be preferential. So the question is, can I have export taxes preferential within an Article 24 agreement? I mean, I'm not saying this will ever go to a court, but it will be very nice to see how you formulate those things to make sure that you avoid legal challenge and you're totally in safe harbor with this type of.
Well, any advice you can give, we'll be grateful.
This will cost a lot of money.
Would it cost a lot of money? Okay.
Yes, it's solvable, this one, I think.
It must be solvable, yes. But,
yeah, sir.
Thank you. I think it works, actually. Okay. Maybe I don't need it. I'm Frank Giaoui. I'm a visiting scholar at Columbia Law School, and I'm French. You started your speech by saying that 40% of international trade is between the US and Europe. Actually, the dynamics are not so good. And my question is very simple, twofold. How do you really negotiate with a partner who clearly has switched focus towards Pacific? I'm talking about the US. And how do you envision the future for Europe in order to negotiate also properly with the Pacific zone or Eastern Hemisphere?
Well, to start with the second part first, we are also involved in many other agreements. As I say, we are looking at whether we have enough building blocks to start into regional negotiations, EU-ASEAN. We have already we've done Korea, we have done Singapore, we have done Vietnam. We are exploring with other countries where we started a few years ago, but where there was needed to take a pause, such as Indonesia, Philippines, Malaysia, and others. In the Latin America, we have the same. We will meet in the beginning of the year with Mercosur ministers to see whether we can resume negotiations on region to region. We have, as I said, lots of agreements ongoing or being negotiated in Africa and in the Pacific, in the Caribbean as well. We have a lot of things going on in our neighborhood. So we have, and many countries contact us to start negotiating. And my friend from Australia there, of course, we are also exploring whether we should start free trade agreement negotiations with Australia and New Zealand. This is in a sort of scoping moment right now, exploring where are the different options, what are our ambitions, are they on the same level. So we have a full agenda on this. I'm not sure that the US, of course, their eagerness to finish the Trans-Pacific Partnership is clear, but that has been negotiated for 6 years. We started TTIP only 2 years, so TPP is basically done. There are a few issues that are complicated, we all know that. It has taken a little bit longer than many thought a year ago, but that negotiation is concluded before TTIP. That has, of course, it's obvious. It's been going on for so many years. We can only trust the statements and the activities by the American administration that they really want to conclude TTIP as well. It is not only we in Europe who would benefit for it. There are lots of issues where the US would benefit as well. So it's a mutual beneficial agreement, both when it comes to the direct economic effects on tariffs and market access, but also on the regulatory cooperation where both of us have lots to win with the regulations as they are today, but also for the future.
I'm seeing many questions. Let me just collect a couple, if I may, and let you navigate the complexities of New York City in just a few minutes. But with that, let me just ask this gentleman to speak, and then over here, and then we'll let you add. Third one, if you're patient, if you also be very brief, and then let you sum up in an expert way as you will. Please.
Hi, my name is Daniel. I'm first year student from SIPA, and I would like to take this opportunity to ask you about how the TTIP is going to affect the geographical indications of European products. I'm talking about the denomination of origins that we have in Europe, and I think they are not really considered here in the US. They are not legally considered, and I would like to know how it's going to be addressed by the TTIP, because I'm from La Rioja, and in the regions they're like kind of concerned how it's going to affect
your wine.
Yeah, our wine and our economy in general. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Sir?
Thank you very much. My name, I'm from NYU Law School. I have a question about regulatory cooperation and TTIP as well, and my question is that the idea seems to be behind regulatory cooperation that the US and the EU come together to set regulatory standards globally And the question that I have about that is to what extent you think there would be room to take global interests into account and maybe the interests of third-party interests when you conduct that regulatory cooperation, especially given that risk preferences and realities on the ground in many parts of the world might not be very similar to European or US consumers.
Thank you. And in the back.
Hello, my name is Osram. I'm a visiting scholar at Columbia Law School and I'm from Turkey. So my question is, how do you see the future of customs union that EU is negotiating without including Turkey?
Good question. Thank you very much. I'm afraid we have to stop there.
To my friend from La Rioja, yes, geographical indications. We have, as you know, thousands of them that are protected internally in the European Union. That will not change. That will not change with this. What we are seeking with the US is to protect a list where member states have put forward their priorities to be protected. In the Canadian agreement that we just finished, we have 154 geographical indications protected. We have a dozen more in the one with Vietnam. So that is the sort of spectrum we are seeking. This is going to be difficult because the US have a totally different approach to these issues. They have trademark rather than geographical indications. So this is something that we will have to struggle with until the end game of the negotiations. But not only my Spanish friends, but also from many other countries are pushing very hard for this. So I know that without any satisfactory outcome on this, there will not be a support in these countries. So trust me, I'm doing what I can. But so far, we have not really entered into those negotiations yet. On cooperation with third countries, that's an important point. This regulatory body or advisory, whatever, doesn't exist yet. So we are still looking and also taking external advice. What would it look like? But one can, of course, imagine also that it would be kind of open and transparent body, that these regulators could also seek advice from third parties or experts, either internally in the EU or US, could be certain specific segments of experts, or externally, when we talk about specific products that could require broader consultation. And finally, Turkey, yes, we are just about, we have decided with our Turkish counterparts to upgrade and to renegotiate the old customs agreement with Turkey. It is clearly outdated. It contains nothing of what is important. It's very limited to agriculture. So we need to add a lot of other issues. So we are involved in sort of background work to try to identify the mandate for this and the scope. In order to start those negotiations soon. And we have also proposed to our American counterparts that once TTIP is done, that Turkey would be one of the natural candidates, if they want, to sort of log into that, as Turkey is already part of the European market via the customs union.
Fantastic discussion. Come back. Thank you so much. This was really great. Please join me.
Thank you. Thank you very much.